This is John from Potentia LLC. Once again, we're doing an installation of the Back to Basics series. Today we're going to be talking about pH and its importance in nutrient uptake. Essentially, pH is vital. It's vital to the uptake of the nutrients of the plant. Different nutrients break out at different pHs. And we're going to talk about having the wrong pH, what it does, having the correct pH, and how I use pH to essentially help my plants uptake nutrients at different times. So the pH scale goes from 0 to 14. The center, of course, is 7. This is known as neutral. Okay. The range for plants, plants that we grow, 5.5 to 7.5. This is the range I use. Now, if you look online, you will find a whole lot of pH charts on nutrient uptake. There's a lot of similarities. They're not all the same. Hydrofarm published a chart, 10 years ago that I found to be very intriguing because it was more detailed in where those ratios of nutrients, where they broke out at certain pHs. So I started using that pH range, adjusting my pH to allow my plants to pick up different nutrients at different times of growth, during the flower cycle especially. It's very important. What I do is I will swing my pH between 5.5 and 7.5. I never go over 7.5 and I never go below 5.5. And there's essentially 3 ranges, set points, that I move my pH through at each feeding. So one feeding will be from 5.5 to, say, 6.2. The next feeding, I'll run my pH from in the range of 6.3 to 6.6. Then the third feeding, I'll put my range between, 6, 7, hold on a sec, 6.7 to 7.5. And then I alternate between these. Okay, so I have these 3 ranges that I move through. And as I said, I change with feedings. So one feeding will be in this range. It doesn't have to be exactly at 6.2 or exactly at 6.5. This is a range that you'll move through. Get it in that window, and that's good enough. The next feeding, I do the same, I repeat, and then after I get through the third one, I'll start it all over again, and I keep rolling that through. And the reason I started doing this, referring back to that chart that Hydrofarm published, is that they showed in that chart that below 6.2, you got 50% more potassium uptake. I thought that was intriguing, so I experimented with it. I tried it, and lo and behold, I got better results in my flowering cycles. So this is the range that I use. Getting back to pH, I've been asked many times, what is pH? Essentially, pH is a scale, logarithmic scale, of the differential between an excess of hydrogen or an excess of oxygen. Neutral is balance between OH, hydroxides, and hydrogen. So when you're adding pH up to raise your pH after you've added your nutrients to your solution, using pH up, that is a hydroxide. If you're using pH down, it's an acid, so it has an excess of hydrogen. So you're essentially protonating the solution to bring the pH down. Let's talk about pH adjusters. There's a lot of pH adjusters on the market. I can think of about 4 or 5 off the top of my head. I prefer to use Advanced Nutrients pH up, pH down. The reason for that is it's most cost effective. You will use a pipette. You will put very small amounts in, say, a 55-gallon drum. Usually, unless your pH is really high in your base water, you're only going to use just a few mils. Now, that's another thing, segueing into your base water. I like to use the purest water I can. RO water is perfect for growing your plants indoors. Outdoors, it's not feasible. If you're using well water, before you add nutrients, before you actually start watering your plants, you should know what your base pH is. And also check your parts per million. But knowing your base pH, you'll have an idea of how your well, if you're using well water, or how your water changes. Even if you're on city water, the pH will fluctuate from different times of the year. So, adjusting pH, I adjust my pH after I add my nutrients. I do know a few growers that do it both ways. They adjust pH in the beginning. They do a lot of pH chasing the pH. I don't like to chase pH. To do it once, get it done, let it stabilize. So I'll add my nutrients according to my feed schedule, whatever feed schedule that I'm using. Then I will take a reading, see where it's at before I do any adjusting. It's best to give your nutrient solution, say 5 minutes to 10 minutes of stirred time to equalize and stabilize. Check the pH again, and then slowly add whatever you need to add, whether it's pH up or pH down. You'll add that slowly, make sure it's stirred thoroughly, check it, and then wait a few minutes. During the wait, what's happening is these ions are adjusting the nutrient solution. The more time you give it, the better it is. If you can wait 10 minutes between adjustments, it's excellent. You will find that if you dump in too much, you will go too low or too high, and then you get into what I call chasing pH. As you'll be chasing it up and down, you're using a lot of adjusters. It's not good. So take it slow and carefully. Okay, back again. Still talking about pH. We're going to talk a little bit about meters. And money. Buy the best meter you can afford. This is a Blue Lab. It's one of my favorites. Again, quality. Try to get the best one you can afford. It'll pay off later on. Calibration. Each manufacturer has slightly different calibration sequence or procedure. So that's why I'm not going into calibration in this video. I want to get several different manufacturers' units so that I can show each one in turn. In this case, we have Blue Lab. Not bad, 130 bucks or so ish, depending on where you buy it. It's a good meter. With pH meters, you always want to make sure the tip is wet. Keep your tip wet. It's very important. If it dries out, it's not going to read right. You'll have to recalibrate. I know some people that put them in a jar with soaking solution. It's not calibration solution, it's neutral soaking solution. You can do that. I like to just use the cap. They often come with a small sponge at the bottom. Make sure that that's wet with the storage solution. Okay. Buy the best meter you can. Don't skimp on the pH meter. Also, ppm meters. Parts per million. I'm going to go a little bit into that. Parts per million is the elemental concentration, the ionic concentration of your fertilizer solution. So it tells you the strength, basically how much fertilizer you have in that solution. ppm is critical. So you have 2 meters that you're going to be using when you're a grower. You're going to be using a ppm meter and a pH meter. Both are vital. And yes, I have a lot of friends that have grown for years without using either. That's insanity. It's beyond me. It's very important, and you can be a better grower if you're in constant knowledge of what you're feeding and what the pH, how much you're feeding, and all that.